Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session in American English Live Teacher Development Series 4. My name is Lauren, and I'll be with you today, along with my colleague behind the scenes, moderator Heather, who will be serving as moderator to help answer your questions and respond to your comments throughout the session. Today, our host Kate will be talking with English language specialist Nina Kang about how authentic assessment practices in the English language classroom can affect student motivation and progress, using student portfolios as an excellent example. So let's go ahead and get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. As Lauren said, I'm Kate, and I'm in the Office of English Language Programs in Washington, D.C. At the U.S. Department of State, and I'm part of the American English webinar team. I'm so happy to see all of you here today. Thanks so much for joining us. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to those of us who this is their first webinar. Is this your first webinar that you've attended with us? Please let us know and welcome. And for those of you who have been here for a long time, for many sessions, please let us know. It's great to be with all of you here today. So let's start by viewing this American English Live viewing group photo featuring Jose Miguel Fuentes Blanco and members of his viewing group in Mexico. We love to see teachers learning and sharing ideas as they view the American English Live series. So please share your photos by emailing americanenglishwebinars@elprograms.org, and we may feature them in one of our next sessions. So let's review our exciting lineup for this series. Our presentations are on the topics of increasing learner motivation, content-based instruction, and communicative grammar teaching. Today is our second session of this series, and we look forward to learning and sharing with you throughout the series. We'll go over more details at the end of the session, so stay tuned. So here's a little bit about what to expect. Each session is approximately 60 minutes long, and it's often related to a Teacher's Corner theme or a massive open online course that we share through the American English website or through the American English eTeacher program. The presenter will present the material, and I, as your host, will ask questions and make comments too. But we really hope to hear from you, our audience, so that we can address your ideas and experiences. Please do share your thoughts using the comments feature here in the chat box. When our session comes to a close in about an hour, you will have an opportunity to receive a digital badge for your participation. At the end of the session, we're going to share a link, and we'll share that in the chat box. And through that link, you can complete a short quiz, and if you answer 2 out of 3 questions correctly about today's session, you'll be able to receive your digital badge through email within about from americanstate.gov. So make sure to check out that link at the end of today's session and take your time to fill out those questions so that you can receive your digital badge. And finally, before we begin, we'd like to announce our upcoming massive open online course, Content-Based Instruction. This course is designed for teachers who are already teaching or are preparing to teach content-based instruction, or CBI. Are you teaching content in your class? Please let us know. Maybe let us know the subject that you're teaching as well. This also is sometimes referred to as content and language integrated learning, or sometimes even as English as a medium for instruction. However you define it, we define content-based instruction in this case as instruction where the content, which could be math, history, science, something like this, is taught in a language that the students are currently learning. In this case, of course, that's English. CBI courses often present teachers with the challenge of balancing the teaching of both language and content. So in this free open online course, we're going to help you overcome the obstacles that you face in balancing those two things, content and language instruction. So as you can see, enrollment has already begun. It began on January 14th. So please enroll at the link listed here. Orientation begins on February 11th, and then the course begins on February 18th and is a 5-week course. So we hope to see many of you there, and we can't wait to learn and share with you there as well. And now for today's session, Assess and Motivate Student Portfolios and Self-Assessments in the English as a Foreign Language Classroom. Authentic assessment is foundational to evaluating student learning through real-life performative tasks. The use of portfolios and self-assessments that document the completion of performance-based tasks is a great way to motivate students and measure learning. This presentation will explore how to develop a variety of authentic tasks, including different types of portfolios, self-assessments, and other performative tasks. We will also explore the use of rubrics in measuring achievement, and we'll examine how to increase student motivation through self-reflective assessment and instructor feedback. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Nina Kang. Nina is a senior lecturer at the American Language Institute at the University of Southern California with over 17 years of teaching experience. She's enjoyed teaching in Uganda, Uzbekistan, China, Korea, Bulgaria, and Montenegro, and she hopes to continue teaching and learning about different cultures. She's presented at numerous international conferences and has been involved in teacher training and curriculum development as a U.S. Department of State English language specialist in Hanoi, Vietnam. Her areas of interest include academic help-seeking skills of international students, collaborative writing models, technology-enhanced teaching and learning, and online or hybrid content delivery. So welcome, Nina. We're so happy to have you with us today, and we're really excited to learn about this topic of assessing and motivating our students.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you. I'm looking forward to this session. I'm looking forward to all of your participation, looking forward to your responses. So I think we can get going, right?
Yeah, sounds good.
So let's go ahead and look at the objectives for this session. I want to start by introducing some new trends in assessment and try to understand what is the role of motivation in assessment design and differentiate between traditional and authentic assessment. And then we'll get into the practical details of what, why, and how of student portfolios, which is sort of at the core of this session, and then do a quick review of rubrics and how we can use rubrics to assess our portfolios.
Great. Sounds like we've got a lot to cover and a lot of great stuff.
Yes, we do. Okay, so we can move on to part one, which is the approach to assessment, a new approach to assessment. And we'll begin with some warm-up questions. Warm-up question. What do you think of when you hear the word assessment? So I'm looking for your responses, so please type away.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you participants. When you hear the word assessment, what comes to mind? What are the first things that you think about? Let's see. Evaluate, testing, exam. Lidra says evaluate. Understanding of students. Judging yourself. Checkpoints. Gathering evidence. Checking progress. Performance, giving feedback. Tests, guide.
Yes.
Excellent. Wonderful responses, everybody. Thanks so much.
Yes, very good. Yeah, these are all good answers. They're all true. This is what we think of when we think of assessment. So let's move on to some common questions, okay, that we need to answer as teachers, as instructors, when we think about assessment design. And we want to look at these questions sort of one question at a time. So if we can first look at the first question, when and how often should I assess my students? If we can get, again, some responses from you.
Yeah, let's hear from you, everybody. What do you think? How often should you assess your students? Let's see. Kenza says at the end of the lesson. Some people are saying all the time or every day, every millisecond, through observation, during and at the end, I assume, of a unit or a topic of study. In every activity, from Jacqueline. Miguel says all the time. Great responses, everybody.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. We have, different ways and different frequencies in which we assess. It can be weekly, it can be, monthly, it can be from beginning to end, and as many of you said, continuously, every millisecond, right? So it's good to have these weekly, monthly assessments because it's like a systematic check. Do students understand what I taught them, right? It's also predictable. It gives them kind of a routine. We always want to kind of assess students in the beginning of the school year and also at the end so that we can measure progress. But yes, I think a great answer is that we are constantly, continuously assessing our students, right? So it's not not just those exams and tests, right? But it's when they're talking, when they're not talking, when they're asking questions that we are constantly assessing our students. Very good. Let's move on to number 2. What aspect of language ability should I assess?
Yeah, what do you think, participants? What aspect of language should you assess? I guess let's think of the different aspects: speaking, writing, listening, reading, grammar, pronunciation. What do you think? 4 skills, all four skills, speaking, the aspect we are working on, great.
Yes.
Whatever is taught in class, critical thinking, communication skills, writing and speaking, particularly listening, problem solving. De La Frou says all aspects should be taken into consideration.
That's right.
Wonderful. Excellent responses, everybody. Thanks.
Yes. Very nice. Very nice. Yes. And that's why I raised this question, is that we want to be thinking about what are all those aspects that I need to assess my students on, right? So we want to be focusing on many different skills, whether it's pronunciation or fluency, vocabulary, grammar, or even content knowledge, right? So it can be a variety of things, but we want to consider these things. And, you know, sometimes we need to assess these things separately, right, as its own category, sometimes holistically. So we want to be kind of thinking about all of these different skills that we want to assess. And then the next question is, what types of assessment tasks should I use? So what tasks do you use?
Yeah, what sort of assignments or tasks do you ask students to do to assess what they're learning? So what kinds of things do you do? So let's see, we have formative and summative assessments. Kumar says presentations. Let's see, pair work activities, group work activities, diagnostic exams, authentic tasks, and tailor designed.
Very good.
Yeah, lots of great multiple choice.
Yes.
Real life situations. Excellent responses, everybody.
Yes. Absolutely. You have all the answers that I was looking for. I was thinking of myself, right? I like multiple choice, true or false, close, fill in the blanks, or essays, presentations. These are all different types. So in that list, we have some traditional types of assessments, and then we have some authentic assessments. And what we want to see is that we want to try to combine those things. We want to be able to differentiate between the two and be able to assess our students on all of those different mediums, right? Okay, good. And one last question is, how do I ensure consistency and meaningful feedback?
All right, participants, how do you ensure that when you are giving feedback that it's consistent across students, so that you're remaining objective, you're not letting your emotions be too involved, and that everyone is evaluated fairly? Let's see, Noreen says the use of rubrics. Miriam says through observation. Victoria says by providing criteria, setting criteria. Must be aligned with objectives. Excellent responses, everybody.
Excellent. Very good. I mean, you have it. You are all pros. Yes, very good. So rubrics, standards, maybe benchmarks. So rubrics is essential, right? Rubrics is sort of the criteria. Right? And then sometimes, depending on where we teach, we have certain standards we have to meet. Sometimes there are national standards within our university. There are certain benchmarks that students have to meet, right? So it is important that we meet those, proficiencies, right? All right, very good. So we answered these.
One quick question before we keep going. Yes. And I think both of us have mentioned authentic assessment already, and I know you're going to talk about it some more. But Nina, yes, would you mind defining it for us a little bit? Let's see, Milton is asking, does it mean genuine, or what exactly does authentic assessment mean?
So, we actually have in couple slides, we have a definition, an authentic assessment. But just very briefly to answer, it's this idea that it's gonna be performative. It's going to involve real world tasks. It's not like a paper and pencil type of assessment, because we think of assessment as like exams, paper, right, and pencil. But we are saying it's not just about that. It's not that kind of an indirect means to assess our students, but a more direct means, right? So they're performing these tasks that they need to display in real world context, right? So I think that would be a simple way to answer that question.
Great, thank you.
All right. So yeah, so we answer some very important questions, very practical questions that we encounter as we think about assessment design. But I want to step back a little bit and think about sort of the underlying, the fundamental questions of what are the real benefits of using assessment. And here I want to look at motivation, because motivation is so important in teaching, in education. And let me just differentiate these two types of motivation. We have extrinsic motivation, like students are extrinsically motivated, meaning they're driven by rewards. They want to get that A. Or maybe they're driven by fear. They don't want to fail a class. They want to pass the course, right? Whatever it is, they're driven by this goal to pass, to succeed, right? And there's the other type of motivation, which is intrinsic. It comes from within, it's internal. And that kind of motivation parallels autonomy. Autonomy is this idea of independence, right? Self-learning. And what we want to do in our assessment design is to appeal to both types of motivation. And I kind of treat them equally, even though they're not equal, right? We kind of know intuitively we want our students to have intrinsic motivation. Like we want them to become self-learners. But at the same time, a lot of us, we have young students. And they're more about the extrinsic motivation, right? They want that A, they want that sticker, they want that good job from the teacher, right? They're driven by extrinsic motivation, and that's absolutely okay. But we need to be able to differentiate the two and be able to design our assessments that can cater to both types of motivation and ultimately direct our students to be more intrinsically motivated so they can become autonomous self-learners.
Great. And Dilafruz here is saying we need both of them in order to achieve our results. So great.
Yes, great. Absolutely. Very good. All right. So then let's go ahead and look at the next part, which is sort of the trends in assessment. So what are the current trends, right? So here we have cultural relevance. I think we want to approach assessment in a more culturally relevant context, right? We want to take into consideration the context in which our students are using English, right? Or the countries that you're from, you know, you don't need to teach them about, you know, necessarily about Halloween or Valentine's if it's not culturally appropriate in your culture, right? You can contextualize, and in China you can talk about spring festivals, right? You can talk about different kinds of culturally relevant topics. So assessments kind of we want to contextualize to the culture, the context in which the
Great. And so by cultural relevance, you mean something that's connected to the student's own culture?
Absolutely. It can be that. It can also be the context, like who are they? Are they high school students? Are they university students? Are they engineers? Or are they going to be future tour guides? Like what are their aim, right? So that word culture can be taken differently, right?
Great. Yeah, thank you.
And then it's also very interactive. So I was saying it's not about like an exam, a paper exam, but it's more interactive. It's them presenting, it's them performing, right? It is formative, and I've seen that word in the chat box many times. So many of you are already familiar with formative assessment, and it's that idea that, you know, it's an ongoing assessment. There's ongoing assessments taking place throughout, right? Every day, every second, right? When students are asking questions, right? We are constantly assessing students, evaluating to see if they are learning. And finally, we want to see that it's about application of knowledge. It's not simply about testing for knowledge and skills, but that they can use that knowledge to apply it in real life context.
Great. And just a quick question about formative. So formative, as you said, a lot of our participants already know about this term, but you mentioned how part of it is ongoing. But
yes.
Is it also about informing what we do, or how else would you define?
Yes, absolutely. So the formative is actually even more instrumental for us as teachers, right? As instructors, we want formative assessments because what it does is it informs us as instructors. Is it working? Are the students learning? What are the common errors that students have? What are the questions that they have? So as you are making these assessments, you realize, I didn't really clarify. I didn't explain that correctly. Students didn't understand that, right? So it's this process of assessing and the process of informing you about how students are learning and how you need to maybe adjust your teaching, right? How to cater to your students.
Great, thank you so much.
Very good. And then, so now we have a definition of authentic assessment here. And the simple definition here is that it incorporates real-world problem-solving skills and tasks that incorporates real-world problem-solving and tasks that involve active application of knowledge and skills. And so here, some of the themes that emerge, I think, is this idea of problem solving, right? Critical thinking, mastery. We want students to have these sort of higher level thinking, right? They are actively applying what they already know. And they're using English language, right? To apply, right? This new knowledge, create new knowledge.
Wonderful. And I love this, the term real world here. And I think a couple of our participants have mentioned this in the comments too, but the types of tasks that are similar to or connected to students' real life problems or things that they encounter in their daily lives, both inside and outside of the classroom.
That's right. That's right. And we want to proactively be doing that in our assessment, is to contextualize it and make it, relevant to our students.
Yeah, and Anna Carola says if they don't get involved with real life situations according to their own culture, they won't relate what they are learning to their lives. Great comment.
Exactly. Exactly. Making that connection is so important in education, in learning, right? If they're making that connection, they're learning, right? They're developing and they're growing. Very good. So the next slide shows sort of the traditional and authentic assessments. I think we've covered a lot of these things, right? I think we have a sense of traditional, more paper-based, right? This idea of, the teacher initiates everything, right? Whereas authentic is more performative. It's construction, creation of knowledge, application of skills, right? So I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to take a little break and I'm going to ask you to answer a couple questions here, okay? So you have some images here. So you have a multiple choice exam. So the question is it a traditional or authentic assessment?
All right, what do you think, everyone? Would a multiple choice quiz or exam be an example of traditional or authentic assessment? It looks like we're getting lots of traditional responses.
Yes, absolutely. That was an easy one, right? Yeah, it is traditional, right? We are giving them choices, right? They have answer choices. They simply choose. Maybe they're guessing, right? But it is a traditional form of assessment. Okay,
great.
Let's move on to the next image. Okay, this is journaling, a student journaling. What do you think?
Yeah, what do you think, everyone? How would this be an authentic or traditional form of assessment, journaling? Looks like a lot of people are writing authentic.
Yes.
Lots and lots of authentic responses. Are they correct, Nina?
Yes, absolutely. There's no right or wrong answer in journaling. They're simply writing, they're expressing, they're applying vocabulary, grammar, whatever they learn. They're applying it to create their own information, create language. And, you can assess by checking to see, do they have the right transitions? Do they have the right conjunctions? You can check their grammar, you can check their knowledge, but it is an open form of expression for students, right? To create knowledge, to apply their knowledge, right? Very good. Next image, discussion.
What do you think, everyone? Traditional or authentic form of discussion if you are assessing them as they participate in a discussion? Looks like a lot of people are saying authentic, of course. A couple traditionals. I saw a couple people write both. What do you think, Nina?
It's authentic, right? We are giving them an opportunity to openly discuss, right? Openly discuss their ideas. And here, you listen and you assess. You see, are the students repeating what you just said, right? Repeating the phrases that you said, or are they actually creating new information? Are they coming up with their own stories, right? Are they creating new language, using English correctly, right? It's a authentic form of assessment. When you just sit there and listen, right? It's not about them presenting in front of others, but they're openly talking, right? Okay,
Great.
we have one last image. The closed
All right,
test.
yeah. How about the closed test? Traditional or authentic assessment? Looks like we're saying, or excuse me, looks like we're seeing lots of traditional responses. Excuse me, are they correct, Nina?
Yes, this is definitely traditional. And closed tests are just, there's one right answer. You have choices and you choose the right word, right? This is definitely a traditional form of assessment. And I just want to say at this point that traditional assessments are valid form of assessments, right? We do traditional assessments and we should. I do traditional assessments as well, right? It's a great way to test knowledge, right? Do they know their vocabulary? Do they know where to put that period, where to put that comma? You can check for discrete pieces of information, right? Whether the students know, can they recall information, right? Do they understand what I taught them last week? It's a great way, but we need to move away from doing solely traditional form of assessment and move towards authentic assessment, right? So in the next slide, we have a image of the Bloom's taxonomy. I think it might be an image that some of you are familiar with. It is a very popular idea. And we often use it in education. And I really like this taxonomy image because it clearly shows you that hierarchy of that cognitive process. This is the way in which our students think. This is sort of in that sequential logical order. You begin by remembering and understanding facts, and then you move on to being able to apply, analyze, and even create information with what you know, right? So what we are doing, sort of, if you look at the bottom, remember and understand, that's traditional assessments. When we are doing multiple choice, true or false, we just want to check and see, do they remember? Can they recall the facts, the knowledge? Do they understand it? And if they're able to do that, we move on to the next phase, which is more the authentic assessment, where we are asking them now to apply and analyze, evaluate, and create new knowledge with English, right? So it is a great reference point for us. And so we can sum up this section by saying that, we really want our students to not just know, but to be able to transfer knowledge, right? That's what Bloom's taxonomy does. As you can see in the next slide, we're aiming for transfer of knowledge. We want students to be able to apply the knowledge they have to create their own language, right? To create their own stories, right? Using English, right? All right, very good. So that was part one.
We had a couple of great responses from Nahir and Matilde and many others who said that they love Bloom's taxonomy, and we're happy you brought that up.
Yes.
And a lot of people, one, Mohammed in particular, who said that it's really good to mix both traditional and authentic assessment
Agreed.
in the classroom. So,
yes. All right, so let's move on to part two, which is portfolios, right? So let's start by looking at a definition of a portfolio, right? A portfolio is a collection of student work which shows student effort, progress, and achievements. And I don't know what comes to mind when you think of portfolio, but I think these images might kind of reflect what you're thinking. We think of like folders, binders, right? And we have student work that's collected, right? So these are, right, good view, good like images of what a portfolio is, right? But let's also keep in mind that portfolios can also come in like electronic form, digital portfolios, right? This is also valid. So digital portfolios, as you'll see in the next slide, can be pictures, videos, recordings of your students' presentation, drawings, their writing, whatever, links. So digital portfolios are also a valid way. I personally use digital portfolios in my class. So in the next slide, you have an example of what my portfolios look like from my class. And so everything I organize according to these portfolios, these folders, right? And if you look at that professional portfolio example, there is a subfolder where I kind of break it down, right? Break down the different kind of tasks I want them to complete, right? Like their bio statement, email writing, their elevator pitch, right? So it contains many different tasks, right, that they select and they put in there as part of their professional portfolio.
For this portfolio, Nina, are you using a learning management system or an online course, or where are these stored?
Yes, so at my university, we use something called Blackboard, which is, it's a learning management system. And I realize many of you may not have that kind of a platform, but there are a lot of ways in which you can do digital portfolios. And I think I talked about Google as one way, Google Drive. You can do Google Share, right? And create folders that you can share with your entire class, that the class can share with each other, right? So there are free options out there, right?
Yeah.
So
It looks like some of our
like
participants are sharing, things like blogs or Moodle, Google, Canvas. So there are a lot of different options that you can look into.
Absolutely.
Would you say, what if our participants don't have access to a phone or a computer where they can create digital portfolios?
Well, that's why, the first image was like just folders, like get a standard folder. And those are great, something, especially for our young learners, right? I mean, they're not going to be able to do a digital portfolio, but they can create a folder with a collection of their work, right? That they can show their family members, their parents, share with friends, right? Those are such valid ways of creating portfolios, right? It's either or, it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Great. So you're saying whatever works in our context.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
So let's go ahead and kind of look at, so why are we using portfolios? So key feature one, portfolios are student structured, right? So we are moving away from being teacher-centered, right, initiating everything, to having the students, right, identify their own strength and weakness and kind of identifying what do they want to learn, what are their goals, right? So they're setting their own goals and they're working towards their goals, right? So we are empowering our students, right? And a big part of student portfolio is that we are asking the students to select their own work. Like, which work are you most proud of? In what areas do you want to improve? So we are putting it on them, right? To tell us what they want to learn, right?
Great. Yeah, I like how this is student structured, and it actually brings up a question from Jana Noor, who says, who is responsible for creating portfolios? It sounds like maybe the students, or what would you say, Nina?
We provide the instructions, the guidelines, but students create their portfolio, yes. So
Great.
We provide like the skeleton, right? We provide the steps perhaps. Maybe we bring in the folders or they bring in the folders. We give them the table of contents, but they put in their own work,
Great.
right? And
what are some of the what are examples of things that students might put in their portfolios?
Oftentimes, I mean, the key thing is their work samples, right? Whether it's their writing or their drawing, recording of themselves, right? So it is their work samples that we want in the portfolio. Along with that, as we've been saying, we want them to identify what are their learning objectives. It's not just any type of random collection of work. It has to align with what do they want to learn? What is the learning objective? And the learning objective can come from you as the teacher, or it can be the student's own, right? It can be a combination of those things.
Wonderful. So the teacher is setting the objectives and the students are submitting their work. I love how, and it looks like, at least from key feature number 1, that this is really about the student. It helps the student to develop autonomy and to share.
Absolutely. That's what we want to focus on here, is that we are kind of collaborating with the students, right? For them to be partners in creating their work and creating a plan for their growth.
Great.
And then the second feature is that it is reflective, right? This is the self-assessment part. Another key component of student portfolio is that students are asked to reflect and assess on their own, right? We want them to assess, not only to set goals, but once they have those goals and they perform certain tasks, we want them to look at their work and be able to identify what they are doing well and what they are not doing well, to identify the errors and to be able to correct their errors, right? And so this idea of self-correction is also, it parallels, higher student achievement. It parallels higher student success because we are giving them that autonomy, right?
Great.
Okay, very good. And then finally, in terms of the why, we want to see portfolios as a learning process, right? It mirrors the learning process in such a beautiful way because we begin with the plan, which is the goals, right? The goals and objectives. We begin with that, and then we ask students to perform, right? The tasks. And then once they submit their tasks, we check, right? We evaluate. And the evaluation is from both the teacher and the student, right? We evaluate together, and then based on that, the evaluation result, we make necessary changes. And through this whole process, students are continuously engaged in reflecting on their work, right? Reflecting on this process of learning.
Great. That's interesting you're mentioning reflection because we have a couple of comments from our participants about reflection. Nahir says, for each item, I asked them to add a note or reflection of the piece, how it was made and what they learned and how they would improve, which I think is great.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Maria and Bertha also say that they include reflection. But Yasmin asks, how can you include a reflection aspect for young learners? Do you have any thoughts on that, Nina?
Well, yeah. So part of it is like, the questions differ, right? So we don't say reflect on your work to like a second grader, but you can ask them, what do you like about this work? Or how do you want to do it differently next time, right? So these are like simple questions, but these are questions that require even our young learners to kind of think about, oh, what do I like?
Yeah,
what do I want to do differently next time, right? So, I mean, it's a matter of just kind of, again, catering to our students wherever they are, right? But yeah, reflection is so important because it really kind of allows for students to take ownership of their learning.
Great, thanks.
All right, so let's get into the practical steps of doing a portfolio in our class. Okay, so these are some steps. So we already talked about, you begin with identifying the learning goals or objectives, right? This is important. And then we want to make sure that the goals align with, it matches the assignments and the projects that we want our students to perform, right? And once those goals and the assignments or the projects, they align and they match, we ask students to do those work. And the students engage in selecting the work, right? The work that they like. I mean, there should be some sort of criteria to help them select the right type of work. But, it's ultimately the students, right? Choice. What are they proud of? Why are they proud of those things, right? And once they select their work, we want to provide feedback, right? We want to provide feedback, evaluate their work, and we also want the students to give feedback on their own work and to reflect on that.
Great. And Ana Corolla says that kind of thing can help students' self-esteem because it shows them their advancement and how they're improving. Great.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Very nice. Yeah. And these like educational terms, like this educational psychology terms, like, motivation, self-esteem, those things are so important in student learning. It really kind of pushes them to really learn and to take ownership of their learning. And those are such important things, right? And student portfolios really, they can really help to do that, to motivate students and to create like self-esteem. Very good. And then, so let's look at then, what are the portfolio organization, right? So what are some components that we put into our portfolio? And, you see there sort of in the images there, you see these are binders, right? Folders, dividers. And what goes in there are, we want to make sure that we have those learner goals. What are the goals? We need a goal, objectives, goals, students identifying what they are good at, what they want to work on, how they want to improve, and then work samples, right? That reflect this sort of the progress that students are making. Portfolio should definitely include teacher feedback. It can be written feedback. It can be oral feedback, right? It can be recordings, right? And then there are self-reflections as well as rubrics. So these are some common types of documents that you would find in a portfolio. It's not a comprehensive list. Okay.
Great. And we have a question from Xala on portfolios. What would be a good time span for a portfolio, or from like a start date and end date for how long or how much time you would have for students to create their portfolios?
Oftentimes portfolios can go from beginning to end, right? Beginning to end of the semester, right? You can have that kind of portfolio. You can have portfolio that is project-based. So for example, in my class, I have a professional portfolio, professional writing portfolio, and that's maybe 3 weeks long, or a final research paper portfolio. So it's up to you in terms of how you want to organize these portfolio assignments.
Another question from Rosina. What if you have students who are not very organized? How do you help them to organize their portfolios and keep them on track?
Organization skill is so important to being a good student, right? In terms of academic achievement, those organization skills are so important. And portfolios can maybe help them with their organization skills, right? So portfolios, the organization is kind of built in, right? Because it begins with, like, as you saw, the list of begins with goal, and then you have samples, and then you have feedback. So there are clear, right, components that students are supposed to put into their portfolio. So I think there's a lot of guidelines that's already built in. And this is something that you can do as a teacher, is to create a table of contents, right? They get to choose what they put in there, but you give them the table of contents and they have to simply, right, follow those instructions.
Great. A couple more questions from Mohammed. How about with large class sizes? How do you manage all the portfolios if you have lots of students in your class?
So keep in mind, the portfolio is not for you to grade, right? If there's like 30 pages, it's not meant for you to read everything and evaluate everything. So portfolios can actually work very well in large classes because you're asking students to choose their work. They will reflect on some of the work, and you will give feedback on some of the work. It doesn't have to be for the entire portfolio, right? Maybe you look at just a few to evaluate, to see how they're doing. But you can, strategically identify which are the big task items that I want to evaluate. Okay, and again, you're collaborating with your students, right? The students evaluate some of their work and you evaluate some of their work.
Great, which I think Ali had a question, but I think you just answered it, which is, should students be involved in organization of their portfolio? It sounds like it's a very collaborative process that's initiated by the teacher, but that's definitely developed and sustained and organized by both the teacher and the student.
Yes, absolutely. And the age level of your students also will determine how much guidelines you provide.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Very good. So on the next slide shows sort of the different types, categories of portfolios. This is not by any means comprehensive, but these are some common types of portfolios. So so let's begin with looking at showcase portfolios. So showcase portfolios, it just emphasizes this product at the end of the semester. Like, so you see an image there of a student poster board, and it kind of highlights their best work, right? It highlights everything they did throughout the year, and they create this beautiful poster board at the end of the semester, and it showcases, right? It showcases everything they learned, things that they're so proud of. This is something they can take back home and share with their friends and family, right? So this is one type of portfolio.
Great. So this is something where maybe there would be an event and all the students would sort of present their showcase portfolio of all the things they learned?
Yes, if you have open houses or something like that where parents are visiting or something, these are great, right? Because it showcases, it displays what they're learning.
Great. One quick question from Edison. Do students get credit for showing a portfolio like this, and how does it relate to the overall class performance for them?
It's ultimately up to you. I mean, the showcases, it's not really meant to be graded per se, right? We want them to do it. We want them to feel proud. So we have different purpose and functions for these portfolios. With the showcase portfolio, the goal is we want to showcase, display, exhibit what they're learning, and for the students to feel proud of what they're achieving. So, I mean, you can absolutely score and grade it, but it's not about a final score, because the next slide will show perhaps a better example of when we want to be grading. So yeah, so there we go. So we have another type of portfolio, which is an evaluation portfolio, right? So this is different, right? Evaluation portfolio is solely for the purpose of grading, right? So what I'm saying is you don't have to grade everything. Right? It's not about grading everything and scoring everything. Sometimes the work speaks for itself, right? It speaks to students' achievement. And sometimes, but we also need these kind of score-based, letter grade-based type of evaluation. And this is the evaluation portfolio, where we have something like this, like a standardized exam. We need for the students to see, you got a 70%. You got a 90%, right? It helps them to see where they are concretely. It also points to a gap in their learning. Oh, you're not doing so well. You just, you got a 70, right? So it points to the gap, or it points to the fact that they're doing very well. You can see an image there of a rubric. Oftentimes we want to incorporate rubrics into these evaluation portfolios, because it clearly communicates to the student where they are lacking and where are, performing really well, right? So that score is not just a random score, but score reflects, right, their performance and how they can improve.
Great. And yeah, it gives them feedback on what else they might need to improve. Even if they've come a long way and learned a lot, there always are ways for each of us to improve. And this kind of helps really clearly define that for the students.
Yeah.
Great.
Good. And then we have one final type of portfolio that I wanted to show, which is growth portfolio. And this is just to emphasize that process of learning, right? That there is growth taking place. And I think, a typical example here would be like a writing process, right? If the students are asked to write a 5-page paper, right? We have, different parts, different stages, right? Pre-writing to drafting to revising and editing to finally getting that final paper done, right? And through that process, we see their growth, right? We see them being able to apply the language in a more sophisticated way, and we see the final product, right? So this would be a type of growth portfolio, right?
Great. Should we choose only one of these types of portfolios, or should we use different ones? What would you recommend?
I mean, different ones, many different ones, as many as you can, right? That's why I was trying to show you just a variety of portfolios, because there's no just one right portfolio, the best portfolio. There are many different types of portfolios. And as I was saying, we want to do different types of portfolios to highlight that students are growing, that students are making achievements, but that there's also gaps in their learning, and that they're making progress, right? So we want to incorporate as many as possible. It's not about grading everything in the portfolio, but there are different functions. Sometimes it's just simply to show, right? Simply to show. And sometimes it's to show what kind of grade you're getting, right? So it's a combination of those different things.
Great. A couple of questions from our audience. From Ali, going back to the showcase portfolios, let's say our students display their showcase portfolios, and some of them you can kind of tell that there are weaker students and stronger students. Does that ever come up, or would that be an issue that might draw too much attention to a weaker student, do you think, or how would you manage that?
I think it's a good opportunity for you to make those observations, right? You can make those observations and see where there is a gap, right? But I think we want to always design the project in a way, right? If you had a poster project, we want to design it in a way where students are able to show their best, to display their best. So I think if you kind of walk them through the process together, I think it will be okay.
Yeah, and I think this is the showcase portfolios are sort of celebrating what people have learned and showing achievements for students of all levels. So
yeah, so it's the focus here is to, like as Kate was saying, is to celebrate what they learned. It's not to point out, oh, yours is not as good as hers, but it's to, wow, you learned this, right? So every poster board, every student had, they made some progress, right? So hopefully it's not about kids comparing it to other kids' poster board, right?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, so I wanted to show you this because these are some self-assessment statements my students have made, and I just wanted you to kind of read those statements because I wanted you to see that students are very self-aware, and they can identify when they're talking too fast, when they're using the wrong noun form, or they're not using the right verb. Like they understand when they're being repetitive. There's a lot of self-awareness. So if you give the students that 5 minutes in class to kind of look at your writing, listen to your speaking, what can you do better? For them to identify where there's a gap, for them to identify their own error and work towards fixing that error can go a really long way.
Wonderful. This actually brings up a question. So as I can see that these students are they must be accustomed to reflecting on their own learning. How do you teach that? How do you teach how to write reflection? This is a question from Ria. Do you teach them that, or do you show them examples? What are some ideas that you have?
My students are not used to self-reflection. So the students that I have, they're not used to reflecting on their work. So it's hard in the beginning of the semester for them to identify, oh, you want me to look at my own work? Like, it's very teacher-centered, right? This teaching, right? So they want the teacher to tell you what they need to improve on, right? So it actually takes effort. So we start with something very, so you give them instructions, okay? Listen to your speed. Right? Okay.
Have them focus on maybe one
just
aspect.
Listen for your vocabulary. You give them specific guidelines, right? Just listen for vocabulary, listen for repetition, listen for your pronunciation, listen for intonation, whatever it is, we give them a little help. And, it takes a little bit of effort and nudging from your part for some students, but once they can do it, it's such a valuable skill.
Great.
Right.
So some examples and then practicing and building that culture where students feel comfortable reflecting and sharing on what they think of their own learning. Great. Thanks.
All right. So the final part of the session is on rubrics, right? So let's move on to rubrics. And, rubrics are such big topics, and, I can do a whole session on rubrics, but I want to just touch on rubrics because it's so important to end on this note, because even if you have great projects, great portfolio projects, unless you have a good way to assess, to measure how well the students are doing, it's kind of meaningless, right? We need to make sure that the students are being, graded or evaluated fairly, right? So we want to make sure that we have these rubrics to ensure that. So let's look at a definition of rubrics. It's a criteria to evaluate student responses, right? So the criteria is important. The criteria is often presented in some kind of a table format for teachers to score. So it can be a number or a score, or it can be just written comment, right? But there is a specific criteria that's written there, right? And that idea of a table format is important because we are saying that these criteria is visible, it's concrete, it's transparent. Students know how they are going to be graded and assessed, right? So the next slide shows sort of the important principles to understand when we think about using rubrics. The reason we use rubric is we want to ensure there's reliability and fairness, right? Reliability and fairness in the way we are assessing our students. So if you look at that image of the target, right? So are the assessments that we give our students, is it on target? Is it actually measuring what we are intending to measure, right? Is it testing them on the skills that they're being tested on, or is it off target, right? So rubrics help us to make sure that we are on target, that we are measuring what we intend to measure, right? We are evaluating and assessing what we want to measure. And the other image shows this idea of fairness. We want to be fair. We want to be transparent. You know, you don't want to be grading one student high because you like her, and then the other student, you don't like them that much, okay? So, you know, subconsciously you score them high, you score her low, I don't know, right? So we have that kind of human, right? Human nature, right? But rubrics help us not to do that kind of thing, right? Because it gives us a way to base our interpretation of their performance on a criteria, right? So it ensures fairness. So we want to make sure we have a good rubric, right? A good rubric that's going to direct us to assess our students fairly and reliably. So the next slide is just a sample of a rubric. It's a very generic rubric. So I think the slide will come up shortly. Very good. So here it's the table format, right? Table format, and you have across on top, you have the certain specific skills that you're looking for, and then you have the point system, right? The language, if you look at it, is very generic, right? Very consistent, meets all requirements, most requirements, some requirements, wide knowledge, good knowledge. These are very generic language. So what we encourage, teachers to do is to, apply these sample rubrics, apply these generic rubrics that's openly available to all instructors, and use it to guide you when you are assessing your students, right? And then along with the sample rubric, we have a scoring form, and there should always be some kind of a recording form, right, where you are recording the numbers, recording the feedback in a way where students can clearly see how they are being graded. Again, it creates transparency, it creates clear communication of what they need to improve on, where they are excelling. So it's a great way to ensure, again, that we are assessing our students fairly and consistently.
Great.
All right.
Ana Carola says rubrics are great because they show your students how they got their grade and what specific areas they need to improve in. Very well said.
Very good.
Great. Mm-hmm.
All right. And so we have our concluding slide. So in conclusion, we learned that assessments can be an effective tool for student learning and growth. Portfolios, they can integrate input, reflection, and evaluation by both teacher and student. And that's so important that students are also involved in that process of evaluating their work, right? And we talked about how rubrics can ensure reliability and fairness, and this is really important. And finally, when thoughtfully planned and executed, assessments can really increase student motivation, right? Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. Nina, do you mind if we have a little bit of question and answer?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So Jazala says, how can we make a portfolio for speaking skills? What would you suggest for something like that?
Yeah, so that's tricky depending on what you have access to over there. So do you have access to certain recording equipment, right? So yeah, because I've taught speaking, and it would be mostly video recording. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be video recording. If you have access to audio recording, that's sufficient for you to do audio recording as well. But yeah, in order for it to be kind of authentic and, interactive, we want to make sure we have like a real, right?
A sample, yeah. Yeah, so maybe a digital portfolio might be better for speaking, yes, if possible.
Yes.
I wonder if anyone's maybe used WhatsApp or something like this for a speaking assessment or portfolio. We'd love to hear more of your ideas on the Ning as we continue this discussion. And what about real beginners and authentic assessment? We had a question from Charo Jose, who I think he might be thinking, when they're just starting out, is it realistic to have authentic assessment, or should you do more traditional, or how do you view that piece, Nina?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think regardless of the different levels of the student, we do have a component of traditional assessment, right? We want to make sure that they're learning knowledge. But even at a very beginning stage, right, even for beginner learners, they learn something, but we want to give them an opportunity to apply. If they're learning 10 new words, give them an opportunity to use those 10 words, right? To use those 10 words to create a story, create sentences, right? Create dialogues, right? So we can incorporate authentic assessments even at that beginning level, right? But, you know, the task that we are giving them is more, it's simpler, right?
Great. And when you're using portfolios in your classroom, Noreen is asking, do you make them mandatory or can they be optional?
Again, that's entirely up to you as an instructor. For me, the way I design my course is that it is mandatory, because when they submit their work, they submit it to the portfolio, right? So it depends, I think, on how you approach the design of the portfolio. But I think it's more meaningful when the whole class, you know, they do it together, right? We do it together. So in some sense, I think making it mandatory helps in that regard.
Definitely. Well, great. Thank you so much. I think that's all of our questions. And I see so many people writing comments thanking you, Nina, for this wonderful presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I think a lot of us really learned so much about different ways that we can incorporate authentic assessment practices in our English language classrooms. I know I learned a lot about different ways to design and instruct students about using portfolios. And I think a lot of us also learned how we can sort of harness motivation and engagement as we develop assessments for our classroom. So thank you so much, Nina, for sharing this wonderful presentation with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And of course,